The movie is set in a world where the government, through its elite military unit, hunts down enhanced individuals with mutant genes, capable of super strength and psychokinesis, in the name of public safety. To run this mission smoothly, the government has named these individuals subjects and classified them in groups Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo, followed by numbers, depending on their strength, with Alpha group being the strongest. Contrary to the beliefs of the government, unless the occasion calls for their supernatural powers, be it when they defend themselves, try to avoid capture, or generally trying to survive in these hostile environments, these individual subjects live every day in paranoia, hiding their identities and trying to blend in. Sergeant George Shepard, leader of an elite military unit, and his partner Scott Cromwell stake out a man named Joseph, suspected of having escaped the government safety house, made for imprisoning subjects like himself. After all, their support unit is in place. Sergeant George and Scott approach him and ascertain that Joseph indeed is a cover name, and that his government-given name is 78-934 Bravo, corresponding to the second strongest class of mutant subject he belongs to. Joseph denies having anything to do with subjects, but gives himself away when his eyes turn luminescent blue as he prepares to protect himself like it does for all subjects in flight or fight situations. So he runs away and they chase him, and he uses his supernatural strength to fight them and keep them at bay. Then, through the commotion, Joseph somehow manages to take Scott hostage and threatens to hurt him unless they let him go. The soldiers then distract him with their drone and rescue their comrade. Joseph is captured and taken to the safe house, where Sergeant George questions the peculiarity of Joseph's behavior in taking a hostage, as it doesn't align with their MO. He shares this observation with his superior, Captain Williams, who dismisses it and instead calls for a meeting with all the soldiers and explains that there are still a few subjects from different groups running loose and warns that they need to be caught as soon as possible. He then goes on to tell his soldiers not to worry about the Alpha, the strongest group of them all, as they don't exist. He further elaborates that the project responsible for the mutants was gladly shut down before the Alphas were made. He also warns to keep their eyes open, as the subjects were being hunted down by their own kind for reasons not yet known to them, and so the goal becomes to get as many subjects as they can to the safe house before this new threat kills them. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a subject by the name Anna hides her identity and works in a garage, and in an effort to minimize interaction with the general public, lives out of her van. Anna dreams of escaping all the brutality and going to China. Dan, her helpful boss, arranges with the local gangster head to get her a passport, but the man changes his mind at the last minute and demands more money from Dan and assaults him when he hesitates, right in front of her. She is then forced to come to Danny's aid. She attacks the group of men and their leader and kills them. Dan, having been stabbed, bleeds profusely. Panicked, she calls help for him and flees the area. Sergeant George and Scott get a notification on their Intel app that a subject is active, and so they follow the GPS, and it leads them to Anna. Because of her small figure, they start doubting if the alert was real, until they see her attack a man that comes up to her randomly to tell her that he can protect her. The man drives off scared, rumbling that he knows everything and that he can keep her safe. Just as Sergeant George and Scott hesitatingly report this and prepare to move on her, they get the notification that someone matching Anna's description was seen fleeing a garage, where 4 dead men were later discovered. Finally confident that she's the right culprit, the duo cautiously start to follow her. After driving for a few miles, they lose her, as she abruptly makes a turn and starts driving through a farm. Then she's suddenly stopped by a light so bright that it almost causes her to crash her van. Then a strange man walks up to her and tells her that she has something of his, but disappears promptly as hears the soldiers approach. The soldiers, having located her through their Intel app, find her. They surround her and tell her to cooperate and be arrested without resistance. She doesn't seem to hear them, as she is screaming in anguish that she is innocent and that she hasn't committed the crimes they think she did, like kill her boss Danny. They pay her no mind, of course, and proceed to subdue her. She tries to free herself, but is unable to without using her superpower, which is super strength. She uses her strength to throw them in different directions and continues to run into the farm. Sergeant George follows her. Once he goes deep enough into the farm, she jumps behind him and they fight. The sergeant then uses his electrified baton to overpower her and proceeds to arrest her, but is unexpectedly knocked out by the mysterious man from earlier, who is revealed to be another subject named David. David then drives both the cuffed Sergeant George and Anna to a remote house where he assaults the soldier, trying to get the location of the government safe house where all the subjects are held, claiming that he wants to free all his kind from the unfair abuse inflicted upon them by the government. Sergeant George refuses to answer, and David attacks using his powers and almost kills him, but Anna stops him just in time and saves his life. David is then distracted by noises coming from the nearby wooded area, made by frantic soldiers who have been shocked to their core as they have just been informed that there's an alpha activated nearby. David leaves the house to check it out. Back at the house, Anna confides in Sergeant George that she had been taken from her family when she was just 4 years old and used and programmed with the rest of the subjects as killing machines by the government. She adds that there was no way to escape and that all the killing any of the subjects ever did was ordered by the government. She blames the normal people for not understanding jumping too quickly to treat the subjects inhumanely. She stresses that there was no way out for them and that the government punished all those who hesitate to carry out their orders. Meanwhile, David sneaks up on the soldiers from behind as they are still distracted and confused by the approaching Alpha sign and attacks them. They get into a fight, and he kills many members of the elite unit. Scott manages to survive. Back at the house, Anna sees a subject with its attack mode activated, signaled by the luminescent blue eyes coming towards them. Before she can react, he reaches the house and starts attacking them. Sergeant George, who was still tied to a chair, is shocked to realize that the subject was Joseph from a few days ago. The sergeant manages to free himself unnoticed and helps Anna. After intense and brutal fighting, they manage to deactivate Joseph through the chips on his neck. Sergeant George questions why Charlie hadn't been reprogrammed and was set free to roam about, and surmises that there really might be something going on behind the curtains. Once they rid themselves of the immediate danger, both Anna and Sergeant George take time to analyze what's going on and to choose their next step. They come to the conclusion that David is not to be trusted, and that he probably has an ulterior motive for wanting to free all the subjects. They also agree that things might not be as straightforward as they seem when it comes to the government, so they decide to run to the woods. After a few miles of running, the strange man that tried to help Anna earlier, telling her he can protect her, finds them, convinces them to drive off, and introduces himself as Ellie. Scott, being one of the very few that survived and completely terrified, goes back to Captain Williams and reports about the Alpha and demands to know what's going on, but the captain is not willing to admit anything, and instead focuses on getting retribution for all the fallen soldiers. Back in the woods, Ellie drives Anna and Sergeant George to his house, which is cleverly hidden among storage units, and where he lives with one of the subjects he rescued, named George. Once there and safely inside, he shares that he used to work as a data analyst at the military base, but quit when he learned of the abuse towards the subjects. He then explains how the government did experiments that resulted in the subjects. Furthermore, he laments their decision not to trust David, and explains that he is looking to harvest energy from all the subjects to make him feel whole enough to return to his home in another universe, as he is made from a combination of mutant genes from a different world. After their discussion, Sergeant George plans to contact his captain and tell him what's really going on, thinking he must be in the dark while Anna prepares to escape into a better world without such extreme prejudice. However, just as they bid farewell to Ellie, to go their next move, David appears out of nowhere and kills him. Subject George fights him off to allow time for Anna and Sergeant George to escape. They do so, feeling terribly sad for leaving Subject George behind. David unfortunately kills George as they feared, and harvests his energy. Captain Williams gets intel of an active subject, and sends his men to catch them, and announces that Sergeant George is no longer their concern, as he has aided and abetted the enemy. Meanwhile, Anna and Sergeant George run away from Ellie's house and find themselves in a parking lot. Anna tries to wire one of the cars for their escape, but David catches up to them before she can do so. He throws Anna under a heavy container and proceeds to kill her, but Sergeant George stops him by promising to lead him to the safe house if he can spare Anna's life. He's tempted by the offer, leaves Anna and the two men drive to the safe house. Sergeant George takes the wheel and hides David in the back of the car. Sergeant George is met with opposition as he arrives at the gate of the safe house and is taken to the captain. There, he doesn't see eye to eye with the captain, and they argue over the subjects, as the captain reiterates that they are just weapons paid for by the government, and so are at their disposal to use for whatever they want, whenever they felt like it, while Sergeant George explains that they have been unfairly used by the government and what they have been through was not justified, especially because they are a result of the government's ambitious experiment. Annoyed with Sergeant George's claim, the captain throws him out of the control room, from where they can see David making his way up the building by killing and harvesting his victim's energy. The captain and his men are visibly worried about this, but don't have time to react as David approaches the control room. They try to fight his entry and try to contain him through the electrified batons to no avail. David then kills all of the soldiers, one by one, and unmercifully, including the captain and Scott. David then turns his attention to Sergeant George, who was watching the whole ordeal through the glass door from outside. He breaks the door separating them and proceeds to brutally attack Sergeant George, but is stopped mid-movement by Anna, who had escaped from under the container using her super strength, and arrives there just in time to help Sergeant George. Then, a very intense fight breaks out. David uses his alpha strength to overpower Anna, who is just a Charlie-class subject. Anna uses all of her super strength to fight back, as Sergeant George revives from his injuries. Then Sergeant George and Anna help each other to overpower and finally kill David. Then 4 months later, Sergeant George arranges to meet with Anna to give her information on the rest of the subjects, their location, and how they're doing. She thanks him, chit-chat and banter, before they go their separate ways. In the last scene, a man is seen unassumingly answering his door, only to see David standing there telling him he has something of his. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.